Yo, welcome back to the VoskCoin YouTube channel. Today we're going to be building a GPU mining rig.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily.
The focus of today's video is to make this easy to follow, shorter than our previous builds, and the best bang for buck in the current market situation. There's a couple different options or routes you can take. We're going to go over all that in today's video and keep it relatively short. Definitely shorter than an hour like the last one. I know what you're thinking. You're like, wow, that is a really cool shirt. Yep, it's the new summer VoskCoin t-shirt. Just made it. It's really not all that fancy. It's just watermelon text spelling out VoskCoin. But if you want to grab one, it's in the link below, and when you buy the shirt, you support the channel and the mission. And honestly, I just kind of thought that it'd be kind of funny and random to make, so here it is, available this year only. Thanks to that awesome furry donor out there, guys. There's going to be an Ethereum giveaway on this video. All you have to do is drop your Ethereum address in the comments below on this video and include your favorite GPU for mining. You don't even have to have it. Just on paper, it could be your favorite GPU or whatever. And the winner will be chosen at the end of the next month. So let's do it. As far as what coins you can mine with this mining rig, I'm going to show you some of the top options. For example, Zcoin, Ethereum, as well as Ravencoin. I'm going to go over the top miners for those and show you how to use them, and also show you which coin I'm personally mining and why. Today we're going to be going over the best bang for buck GPU mining rig build in 2019. I'm going to be going over a lot of the parts to use, but briefly, because in the video description I have a full build list that's linked out with links to all the parts, and also a link to even more parts and alternatives at the top of that list, because last time I ran out of room giving alternatives on the video description and our ultimate GPU mining rig build 2019 guide that was released a couple weeks ago. So with all that said, today's video is going to be more focused, more condensed, less of this talking and more of just showing you what's going on. So to kick it off briefly, I'm going to go over the parts that you're going to need for this. You're going to need, yeah, you guessed it, GPUs. I'm going to cover really the top options for that, because there are a couple different options that would still constitute being the best bang for buck, because that's the name of the game, putting some money in and hopefully extracting more out. I mean, you don't want to be playing a losing game here, do you? I mean, I personally don't, maybe do, I don't know. But that's a different point, I guess. So let's go ahead and run through the parts. We've got GPUs, right? That's kind of what you want to center your rig build around, because it's going to impact a couple other things. You're also going to need a motherboard. There's a lot of different motherboards out there, and I'll have some options for you again below. We've used the Gigabyte Z270 D3 so many times here on the channel. It's a great board. We've always had great success with it and a lot of just great longevity. There's also the Asrock H110 Pro BTC Plus. What's cool about this board is not only can you run make a 6 GPU mining rig with it, you could run up to 13 on it. Me, I don't really do 13, more of 12 if I go for a big rig. And keep in mind, these all have to be on risers, and but that's gonna be typical with most mining rigs. When I say riser, I'm talking about this guy. Okay, so this is a riser. It's gonna rise your GPU off of your motherboard. There's a couple options for risers. You don't want to power them with Sata or Molex connections normally. Your best power source is going to be a PCIe port, which is this one. It's the VGA port. It says on power supplies. It's going to be the same kind of port that goes into your graphics card. The problem is, with a lot of graphics cards, you'll end up running out of those, and you won't be able to connect them all to your mining rig, which, again, we'll talk about that and how to tackle that a little bit more here later in the video. Keep in mind that throughout this video, I'm going to touch on a whole lot of topics, and in the video description below, there is a timestamp list to take you everywhere in the video. You want to talk about risers? Click that, timestamp. You want to go to the best bang for buck GPUs to use for mining in 2019, and you just worried about, some GPU focused content? Maybe click that. If you want to talk about CPUs, there's going to be a timestamp for that. Doing it all here at VoskCoin, because that's kind of my job, I guess. So, yeah, pretty simple stuff. You just need, you're going to plug your graphics card right into it. And then from there, you're also going to plug it into your motherboard, because that's kind of going to be how your mining rig works. And these GPUs are basically your workhorses. This guy plugs into the motherboard, and that looks like that. Thank you, B-roll, for shortening this video. And That's that component of the GPU rig. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go over just real quick the basics of setting up your rig. You need a motherboard, and it needs to be able to support at least 6 GPUs. I mean, that's what I would recommend. And once you do that, you're gonna need a CPU. In our previous mining rig build, we talked about Ryzen CPUs and why I really like them. However, they're not gonna be the cheapest. If you want a really cheap CPU, options like the G3900 and the G4400 and the G4400T, which are Intel CPUs that work with these Z270 motherboards, which is like basically the model type. And they're gonna be cheap because, you know, mining was crazy and prices went up. Mining was not as crazy, prices went down. And with Bitcoin, you know, hitting 13K right now, pretty much, especially if all the altcoins rally, like, you know, Ethereum and Grin and Beam and everything, they keep, well, they already have, and they keep going and going and going, then mining profitability is going to keep going and going and going up. So it's kind of, at this trajectory, this may be like the last chance to get mining equipment at a good price. But anyway, back to the focus point of the video. You just drop your CPU in, have the text line up with the motherboard normally, so if it's like Intel and you're reading it like that and you read the board like that, it's likely that your CPU is just going to go right in there. I actually don't have a spare one with me at the moment because it's still in that motherboard. Right next to me, there's a rig right here, it's out of frame, you can't see. And all you do is just push that down and you're done. You need RAM, and you will just take the RAM and you'll put it into the RAM slot. Looks like this. The rule of thumb is for a Windows build, you want 8 gigs of RAM, and for a Linux build, you want 4 gigs of RAM. You'll also need a power supply because that's going to power your rig. And with that, it's going to really depend on what graphics cards you're using. Are you using a 2070? You're going to be needing a little bit of a beefier power supply. If you're using something like a 1660 or 1660 Ti, a little card like this, or like a 1650 especially, you're going to be using less power. And if you have less power use, you could get away with a smaller and thus cheaper power supply. Again, trying to keep that bottom dollar cost down. As far as a rig frame to put all this stuff together on, there's a lot of options out there. You can DIY, make your own frame. There's a lot of good content out there to do that. Some people make wood frames. I really don't recommend that because if there ever is some kind of fire, well, guess what? Your wood's gonna burn up. So I only use metal personally, at least these days. Before I experimented with some stuff, but I definitely don't recommend it. So with that, there's like these cheap beta frames that look, these are the parts look like this. I don't know how you guys do it. These things really annoy me. I know if you keep doing it, you get better and better at it. Not really my thing. However, Veddha did come out with a better, more sturdy rig frame. Looks like this. I'm not shilling it, man. I don't give a crap if you buy this stuff. But that's what I'm going to be using in today's video because it's honestly a pretty cool sturdy frame. And it even has a power switch integrated. That's kind of cool, right? I mean, I think that's cool. And you can put fans on it if you want. Use these supplied fan brackets. And this is starting to flex my biceps, so I'm gonna put that down. And yeah, it's a pretty cool compact rig. What I like to do when I build these rigs is I want them, you know, sturdy so I can move them, and just a nice package if we're going to be doing an open air rig. There's also riserless rigs, which we've built here numerous times on the channel before, and we have some actually new upcoming builds with those as well. Those are super cool and I really like those, but today we're going to be talking about a riser based build. Assuming you don't use this frame, then you're going to need a power cable. They look like this. This is actually a super cool white and purple one, uncommon. Normally they are black and red, which look more like, well, exactly like this. As far as motherboards go, depending which model you use, it's probably going to say PWR, which is going to stand for power, or some of them even say power button. And when you do that, you're just going to slide it on to wherever that is relevant. And where it has the back metal showing, you're just going to have that facing the majority of the motherboard. That's how you know it's going to be facing forward and properly. Then to activate it, it's pretty simple. You are going to click a button. In my last GPU mining rig build, I talked about Ryzen CPUs. So if you want to hear more about that, check out that one. But today is going to be getting the cost down. Those CPUs they're very cool, but they're expensive. This is all about, again, lower costs, trying to increase that, you know, return on your investment and reach your break even quicker. Okay, they aren't the same thing, and thus we're going to be using these cheaper CPUs. Not recommended for gaming, but great for mining. But you actually can game on them. I've done it before. I mean, it's not the best experience when we play in max settings, but It's doable, definitely doable. Let's take this rig kit for example, and with this, you can see that, so I went with this Veddha frame, which again is linked out. It's like 50 bucks or so. Nothing crazy, but it's not the cheapest one either. It's a little bit nicer. Some things it saves you on is it does have power button, which saves you like a whopping $2 if you don't have any of those, but you can buy like 100 bulk for like 20 bucks, which we did once upon a time, so not a really big saving there. Risers are pretty cheap right now. I mean, they used to be like 5 bucks per good riser, but that cost has calmed down some. As far as setting this stuff up, I'm assuming you've got a rig frame, right? You put it together. Pretty simple stuff. We're not going to show that in today's video. That's already been done. Basically, line this stuff up, put some bolts in, and then you got to mount these risers on here and your motherboard. Again, pretty simple. You put the standoffs, you put it on there, and you screw the stuff in. From there, you need to hook up the power supply to everywhere where it's relevant. You need the motherboard 24 pin, which is like that really big cable going into the motherboard. You need the CPU cable going into the motherboard. If you have a motherboard that needs supplemental power, for example, like this H110 BTC Pro, then you'll need to, it's recommended that you connect like a Molex connection here, and that's going to supply more power to these risers because that's just not a normal application and they're just a higher intensity thing. So you got that. You got your RAM in. As far as where you put the RAM, honestly, it's going to depend on the motherboard. Consult the motherboard manual depending on which one you're using, but it's likely to work in many of the spots, which basically means there's 4 slots on the board, right? So we got A, B, A, B. So if you did, if you have 2 4GB sticks of RAM, which would be 8 gigs of RAM, you'd put them in here or here, again, depending on the motherboard. If you're using the Asrock H110 BTC, you should probably put the RAM here, and if you're using the Gigabyte board, you could put it here. And if you're using an Asus board like we're using right now, well, that's where you should put the RAM on it. One of the next things to discuss before we go into the GPUs, because we're just going to sum up the rig build right here, is going to be wire management. You can wire manage this stuff as much as you want or as little as you want. Basically, that just means like keeping it relatively clean. Like right here, I took these PCIe risers that are connecting into the motherboard, and I routed them right under here, and I took a zip tie and I just put them in a little collection right there. It keeps it cleaner. Also keep in mind you'll want to connect your PCIe cables to the motherboard, and what you will do is you will start closest to the CPU and work your way out. If you need to put thermal paste on your CPU, like say you bought it used, make sure it comes with a cooler, by the way. But so you get the chip, and then you get the cooler, and you put the chip in the motherboard, and you'll just put a little pea-sized bit of thermal paste on it, and you'll put the cooler on it, and you're good to go. Pretty simple stuff. Don't be intimidated by it. There's a lot of good options out there. We, pretty much always used Arctic Silver 5. It takes forever to go through a tube of this stuff, and get it a day or two off Amazon for like 7 bucks or something. You'll also need a hard drive. For the hard drive, you're either going to be using a 16 or 32 gigabyte USB stick, or an SSD, or an M2 drive. There's a couple of things you could use too, but we're going to keep this video simple. Basically, if you're using a Linux build like SimpleMiner, SMOS, or HiveOS, you're going to want to use just the USB stick. 16 gigabytes will work, 32 gigabytes will work. I personally use 32 gigabytes because I'm worried that, they'll get too big one day, and well, screw you guys with all the 16 gigabyte sticks. I got 32, so I'm set. There's really like hardly a cost difference in that, especially in today's market. So with that, you just load the OS onto there, plug it into your rig, and you go from there. Today we're going to be talking about a Windows build to have a little bit more versatility. Also, this is going to be ran off of Wi-Fi, and if you want to mine on Wi-Fi, you're going to need a Wi-Fi adapter. There's a couple options out there, but we just use these cheap Panda sticks for like 10, 12 bucks, again off Amazon, and they get the job done. And to answer the question we get here commonly at the channel, can you mine on Wi-Fi? Yes. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You can mine on Wi-Fi, it's fine for almost every algorithm. So now comes the most important part, what GPU? And here's the kicker. There's not really going to be a new GPU that's going to be the best bang for buck. If you go for the best bang for buck for a new graphics card, you'd be looking at a 1660, which we have right here, which looks a lot like our 2070 though. Doesn't look too much like any of the other GPUs out there right now, other than just the other Ventus models that they pretty much have released for most of the NVIDIA line. So with that, again, best bang for buck for new GPUs is going to be the 1660 and 1660 Ti's. They're pretty versatile. They've got 6 gigabytes of memory on board, and they're absolutely great at mining Ravencoin. As far as used GPUs go, and that, again, that's what this video is really going to be more about, it's really going to depend, what can you get for a good deal? Because when you see a 1070 Ti that is a relatively newer graphics card, it's not part of the latest generation, but it was at the tail end of the previous generation, and these go for about $300 on eBay, and that's like current eBay prices. You find the right guy selling a stash. I mean, people have sold these for $150 a piece, which I just think is absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. But they're pretty effective. They got 8 gigabytes of memory on board. It makes them versatile. They can mine a lot of coins. And really, you want to be shooting for a card with 8 gigabytes of memory on it. 4 and 6 will work. 6 is obviously going to be better than 4, but the more the better in this case. And today's video is going to be structured around an NVIDIA rig build. However, I'm not just going to completely leave RX cards off. If you can get an RX 470 or RX 570 that's in good shape under $100, that's probably a good deal. Get it more like $80, $70, $50, yeah, now it's really going to become a steal, because they're only getting easier to use, and they are still one of the most efficient graphics cards for mining out there over 3 years later. But I'm about to go on a tangent about this. I just came back in time to cut this clip in. So basically, it's just gonna come down to getting a really good deal for a card. If you get any card at the right price, it's gonna be the best bang for buck, and that's gonna always be changing. But again, some things to keep in mind. I mean, you get a 1080 Ti for like $400, you're doing awesome. 500, that's not too bad either. But if you're paying $700 for a 1080 Ti, you may not be in for the best time. While that was the original retail price, and that's okay. One, they're no longer sold, so stock is up and down, whatever. But my point is just that it's all about getting a good deal, getting it cheap. If you're gonna buy used, it should make sense, financially. Otherwise, again, you're best just stick it off with a 1660 Ti or a 1660 if you want to mine some algorithms that don't require 8 gigabytes to mine. So for me personally, I picked up a couple cheap 1070 Ti's. You may remember this card. It's the same type of card that Miss Vosk used in her GPU rig build. I'm also going to be making this a multi GPU rig, in the sense of not just multiple graphics cards of the same type, but I'm gonna have, say, a 1660 Ti on there as well. And I'm even gonna throw my 1650, which is so lightweight, it feels like a toy compared to these other ones, onto this rig, and gonna run some numbers with that here. For this build, I'm going to be using a Windows, and with that, I'm going to use an SSD that I have. Why? Well, I would do an M2 drive, but I just already had this hanging around, and this is gonna be cheaper than an M.2 drive, which that's this little stick, plugs right in, eliminates cables, super awesome, super fast. Highly recommended if you care. But if you're looking for cheap, okay, you're gonna be looking at USBs for Linux, and you're gonna be looking for SSDs for a Windows build. It's not a very big card. I mean, this one has 120 gigabytes on it, and that's gonna be sufficient for us in this build. It's not going to be something you're going to put all your family's pictures on, but it is going to be something that you can go ahead and mine with. In order for this to work on your mining rig, you're going to need a SATA cable. This is a fancy red one. Normally they're black, and they probably about 2 of them come with almost every motherboard purchased, just right there in the box. And it's just going to plug right into there. And you're also going to need a SATA power cable, which will go to your power supply over here. And well, I'll show you that here in a second. This is just going to plug right into your motherboard, into these SATA connections right here. That's what all these guys are for, and it just simply plugs right in, and that's how these guys talk to each other. Before we jump into the software side of building your mining rig or really getting it running, I want to make a couple quick tips when you're putting this rig together. Some things I've learned along the way, and some things are honestly just kind of like safety tips. For example, when you are powering a mining rig, you're going to need a lot of PCIe connections, as we talked about. And sometimes you're just not going to have enough. And it's okay to use PCIe splitters if you're using a decent quality, and you always want to stick with an 8-pin. What exactly is an 8-pin? An 8-pin has 8 connections here on the back as opposed to 6. That's how you get the 6-pin and the 8-pin. Long story short, an 8-pin is rated to handle more power, and thus it is safer. It's always best to avoid any kind of splitters if you can, but if you do need to do it, these are the best ones to use. Again, everything's linked out in the video description below. While powering your PCIe risers with a SATA connection is not necessarily recommended, I am going to be doing it in this build. If you do decide to power your risers, aka GPUs, with SATA cables, then make sure to never power more than 2 PCIe cards with it. A couple more quick notes before we dive into this, and that is just that you need to check how much memory is required for what coin you want to mine. This is going to vary coin to coin. For the most part, most cards can mine most coins. However, for example, on Zcoin, the MTP Merkle Tree Proof mining algorithm, originally you needed 8 gigabyte GPUs to mine it. And then since then, there has been development of 5.5 gigabyte solvers for that mining algorithm. However, if you have a 4 gigabyte card, like the 1650 we want to use, but if we're going to be mining that coin, we're not going to be able to utilize it at all in this mining build. This card only got 4 gigs of memory on board. Same with like a 4 gigabyte RX 470 or 570. So those wouldn't work. But this 4 gigabyte card would work on Ethereum, for example. So for the purpose of today's build and what I personally want to throw this rig at, which would be Zcoin, I'm going to actually leave the 650 off and just put that on my test rig, my tri-miner for now, and focus this rig on cards that have enough memory to be able to mine it, aka 6 gigabytes plus.
Messing with my head again, messing with my head again.
You never know the issues you're gonna run into. So again, this build was made entirely of used parts, and looks like somewhere along the way this riser broke, right? And I'm pretty sure there was an issue with the riser because when I was trying to, run this card, the card was doing this. The fan, it just wasn't operating like the other ones. Kind of a telltale sign, right? Well, I replaced the riser, and the fan on the card was working, but it still wasn't being picked up and being able to be mined with. Turns out not only the riser was bad, but so was this little guy, the piece that goes into the board. Obviously, if you replace a riser, you should replace the cable with it as well as the piece that goes into the board. But naturally, as you do this for a while, you probably just end up replacing that riser, especially if you routed those cables in any sort of semi-nice way. That's a little lazy, and it could cost you more troubleshooting time, like it did with me. It wasn't until I replaced this with the appropriate piece to go with the new riser that the card began to function properly. I did still leave the actual cable, so I can't say I did it perfect, but it is working now, so that cable, the USB cable, is fine, but it was, these two pieces that were no longer functioning properly. I also overlooked in this build, I was maybe hoping to use 1070 Ti's and cards like the 1660 and maybe a 1650, and those are gonna be using CUDA 10, and I'm using, an older CUDA version on those older cards. That is just absolutely not worth the time tinkering with. So don't plan to mix generations that are that far apart. You could have a rig with 1070s, 1070 Ti's, 1080s, 1080 Ti's, no problem. And you could have rigs with 1650s and 1660s and so forth. Not really probably going to be an issue either. But you start mixing those generations and you're going to have a bad time. Just some things to keep in mind depending how you're looking to create your rig. Naturally, it's always, in my opinion, ideal and best preferred to have a GPU rig consisting of at least all the same card type. It doesn't have to be the same, EVGA or MSI version of a GPU. That's not a big deal, but it's really, you don't have a better time if your whole rig is, say, all 1070 Ti's, which is why I went ahead and switched over to that in this build. Also, something's going on with that motherboard. I've used it on other builds before, and it's been great, but this used one I picked up, I don't know, I haven't personally had it running before, so I went ahead and swapped in another motherboard and CPU combo that I have here. And again, I feel like with this build, it's kind of been like one thing after another, and I haven't even brought you inside to look at the software portion yet. Also, the power consumption is a little bit higher than I planned because I really wasn't planning to put 6 1070 Ti's on here and on 120 volt, which basically means, standard US residential electric, your watt consumption, right? It's going to be higher on 120 volt versus 240 volt. The specifics are basically due to the ampage, but again, that's a little bit of a deep dive. I'm going to leave that to the side for now. The simple fact is that I'm pulling more power through this rig than I had anticipated. So As you see here, I am actually maxing out the power. I'm running it at about 100%, which is not good, not recommended, and I'm losing efficiency there. So really this rig, in this kind of configuration with 6 1070 Ti's, it would be better off with two 750 or 850 power supplies, or a nice, beautiful 1600 watt EVGA power supply, or even like a Corsair 1500. I mean, again, there's other options out there. So for me personally, I'm probably just going to go ahead and swap in a 1600 watt titanium EVGA in there. On the used market, they're really not that bad of a price still, and with the way crypto is moving, that may change here in the not so far future, or it may not, I don't know. And while this build hasn't exactly gone according to plan really much at all, it's still been interesting, and while frustrating at some points, overall still obviously fun, and it's been a good refresher and really a good experience just to talk about with you guys. And it's not often in my builds, because I'm normally using new parts, that I run into these kind of issues. So I hope that these help someone out there. And finally, let's go ahead and get inside this rig and look at the software configuration portion. All right, guys, the rig is up and running. It's been running for over about 12 hours now, more or less. And poolside, it's averaging over about 16.5 mega hash a second, which is very, very impressive, because the latest CC miner release from DJM is just great. It's great. It's really bumping up the performance here. It's more effective on almost every GPU, except for I think the 2080 Ti still gets beat up by the other miner, but I mean and it's like by 5%. It's not much. So anyway, this is the new miner for Zcoin, and it's the best miner. When you actually go in here, right here off the GitHub, you can download the ccminer.exe and the .cmd, which is going to be the basically bat file. And from here you can edit that. You can use the text editor, or you can just use Notepad if you don't have it installed. And all you're going to do is you're going to put in the pool address you want. I recommend decentralizing the hash rate and mining on things like Mint Pond instead of 2miners, even though 2miners has been a great pool for me. They just have like 85% of the hash rate on this coin. Granted, I'm using 2miners here today, so I can't kind of sound like a hypocrite, but they find more blocks quickly. It's a lot easier to analyze the miner and how it's doing when you're using the biggest pool. You can come in here and you can change the addresses. Honestly, I just changed all the addresses and it worked. It was a simple solution, and not worry about make sure if I changed the right one or whatever. So I put in all the same pool information, and then the port number, and then I put in my wallet address, worker name, and from there you need to make sure you go to D, right? So D is going to be devices. So if you run this miner and it's only detecting 2 GPUs, it's likely that you have the default 0, 1 input here. So you need to put on there as many GPUs as you have. So if you had 12 GPUs on your rig, then you would put up to 11, because 0 counts as 1 basically. So make sure you're doing that if you're wondering like, yo, where are the rest of my GPUs? For overclocking, I'm using MSI Afterburner. And with that, all this information, the over 16 megahash a second for 6 1070 Ti's, was calculated on stock settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump this down to 80% power limit, and I'm going to bump the power consumption, or not the power consumption, the core clock and the memory clock both up to 100 plus 100 each. And from there, I'm going to input a manual fan speed that'll be a little bit faster. Maybe keep these guys a little bit cooler, because they're running pretty hot right now, in my opinion. And from there, we will be reducing the heat created because we lowered the power consumption. And then we're also increasing the fan speed, and actually pretty drastically. You can already see this GPU dropping in temperature, which is cool to see. Now looking at the poolside hash rate, which is going to be different than the hash rate you get in the miner, we're getting about 16.21 megahash a second with the stock overclock settings and power consumption. Now, as it evens out, after we adjusted the power consumption and the overclock settings, we need a little bit more time to fully analyze this, but the most recent result was 15.5 megahash a second. Now we have another share accepted at almost 16 megahash a second. So you can see we've so far, I mean, we need more time to fully calculate, but we basically haven't really changed the hash rate maybe a very minimal decrease, but we've reduced the power consumption by 20%. That's a big deal. And look at the GPU temperature between adjusting the settings and also adjusting the fan speed, which I guess is part of the settings. I mean, it's also down here. We dropped significantly. At 50, I mean, we dropped about 20 Celsius. This isn't Fahrenheit, this is Celsius, so that is simply put more. Next we have another share here. What's that say? 16 mega hash a second. So again, these are very basic settings, but in these tutorial videos I like to give out the basic settings because you can fine tune this a little bit more. But again, there's going to be so many different GPUs out there that while this may work for me, or a more aggressive setting may work for me, you would need to scale that back, and it's not fun to crash your rig, especially on Windows. And while I'm personally mining Zcoin, you're welcome to mine any other coin you'd like. And some of the top options that people would want to know about and want to mine would be things like Ethereum, as well as like Beam, Grin, and Ravencoin, and so forth. But let's just go ahead and boot this rig onto Ethereum quickly. So I'm not going to let this run super long. I'll let it start up and then we can look at the hash rates. So the miner hasn't been running too long, but you can see our third GPU is sort of a bum GPU running at 24 mega hash a second, and the rest are above 27. And as you can see, while this performance is not awful, I guess, on Ethereum, it's not ideal. If you're going to mine Ethereum, you're really going to be looking at cards like the classic RX 470s and 570s. You get a good deal on those. Some people buy those cards used for $50. Okay, used, this card is $300, and it gets a better hash rate. It's just some things to keep in mind. Also, the Radeon 7 is excellent on Ethereum. It's not the best bang for buck, but it is very, very powerful. So it's good to understand what your rig can do on Ethereum because it's simply just such a staple in GPU mining, even though it's plagued by ASICs now, which is just kind of weird. But who knows what the future may hold. If somehow we all got really lucky as miners and they switched to a new mining algorithm, it could be a really exciting time. As far as getting Phoenix Miner, I'll links out to all the miners I'm using in this video in the video description below and that article. This is, straight off their Bitcoin Talk thread, the official Phoenix Miner thread right there. And you just scroll down here to their Mega NZ download link, and you can get the latest version, which is 4.2c. If you want to mine Ravencoin, because why not? It's Ravencoin, right? Then you would just download the T-Rex miner. The T-Rex miner is arguably one of the best miners for Ravencoin. As far as the best GPUs for Ravencoin, really right now the best GPUs are the 1660, the 1660 Ti, and the 2060, with actually the 2060 being the best new card to grab. But when it comes to used cards, I mean, if you get a 1070 Ti for like $200, maybe even $250, you got a really, really good bang for buck there. Even at $300, these cards are very valuable on this mining algorithm. So just some things to keep in mind. I can't give you the exact hash rate for this rig right now because diagnosing a Ravencoin hash rate takes much longer than, say, like Ethereum, because there are 16 algorithms that comprise the Ravencoin mining algorithm, whereas these other ones simply just have normally one. If you want to mine coins like Grin or Beam, we have a couple in-depth walkthrough videos on how to do that. You can go over here and grab the latest G miner release. Not sponsored, they just have one of the best miners out there for this stuff. This also mines things like Bitcoin Gold and some other coins. In here, you can just go ahead and double click the start.bat file of the coin you want to mine. You click edit and come in here and put in your own address and information there. Again, we have full videos walking you through all that stuff. If those are the coins you want, they'll be linked out in the description below. A couple other miscellaneous things that I didn't fully elaborate on. Again, if you want to overclock your GPU, best thing to do and simplest is MSI Afterburner. Again, always linked out. And with that, it's the very simple settings here of adjusting power limit, the core clock and the memory clock, and so forth. You also need drivers. You can just download GeForce Experience, and the annoying part is you have to set up an account. But once you do that, you can come over here and click drivers, and you can grab the latest driver, game ready driver release. And with that, it makes it easy, it makes it simple, and you don't have to upgrade. It doesn't force upgrades on you, but if you want it, they are right there. And maybe the only other thing to note would be if you'll probably have Windows Defenders on, and from there you will want to go into your security settings, which I believe is virus and threat protection. You can come down here and go to manage your settings, and you can turn off the protection settings, because if you don't, it's very likely that it will be quarantining all of your miners that you download, and that's kind of annoying. So as always, it's an interesting experience building a GPU miner, especially from miscellaneous / used parts. When you start a build like this, it's likely you're going to run into maybe a couple random issues, maybe get a dead riser. You got to prepare for that. You got to expect that. And hitting that riser issue in this build for me, proved to be very annoying, and just it was very annoying because it was actually that little riser piece that was causing an issue for me, the one that goes into the board. I don't know if the riser was working or wasn't working fully. It didn't seem like it was. Naturally, when it comes to stuff like that, you just toss I did the lazy thing, and I just replaced the actual riser piece instead of the riser piece, the cord, and the piece that goes into the motherboard. And that cost me some more troubleshooting time. When it comes to troubleshooting a GPU rig, the best thing to do is just, start with one GPU. Does it work? Does it mine? Cool. Add another. Does it work? Does it mine? Cool. And then keep going. And if you add a fifth one and it's not working anymore, it's probably something to do with that fifth one. And so again, it's a lot of variables here, but that's why we have things like our super awesome VoskCoin Discord server, where our community is active and helpful. And if you're running into issues, there's some awesome guys that are always on there any time of the day that will be interested in helping you diagnose stuff and just hanging out and posting some funny gifs. So with all that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to the VoskCoin YouTube channel, hit the thumbs up, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for watching. I'll be holding you.